Well, good afternoon, and thank you for taking the time to come this afternoon. My name is Rene Poche. I'm with the Corps of Engineers New Orleans District. And on behalf of our commander, Colonel Scotty Otan, I want to welcome you. He sends his regrets. He got called to Washington, D.C. this week, so he would really like to be here. He's a native of the Homa area, and he's anxious to get here and meet as many people as possible. So again, thanks for coming. It's really important that you're here, because we need to hear from you. We need your participation. The way things are going to go today is we're going to run through a presentation, and then we're going to have another open house after. I know you've talked with some of the technical experts already, but they'll be available again after to answer any questions that you may have that comes up during the presentation. And then to leave a comment, there's 5 different ways you can do it. You can see it on the board over here. They're up here as well. There's the QR code, the project website. You can snail mail it in. You can email it in. And we have a court reporter in the back. You can go and leave a comment there as well. They all become part of the official record. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the subject matter experts now to lead the presentation. Thank
you. Thank you, Renee. My name is Lacey Shaw. I'm with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I am the Senior Project Manager working on the Morganza to the Gulf project. With us, of course, we have other folks that are on the team. I'm going to introduce them. Right here is Laura Carnes, Brian Onahowski, got it, all right, Jordan Lagarbo, and Patrick Smith. So we're going to tell you a little bit today about what's been going on with Morganza to the Gulf. So our purpose is a public meeting to support the draft supplemental environmental impact statement, but mostly we're going to tell you what's been going on, what changes have been made, how we've gotten our information, how we're making decisions, and we're coming out to you to give comment. We want to hear feedback. So we work in the New Orleans district office, and I spend a lot of time here and I love it here, but we are there and y'all live here. And most importantly, we want to hear what you have to say. Y'all have insights about how things work. Y'all have the history of the area. So your voice matters, and we do want to hear from you. All right. All right, so the meeting purpose, like I said, is I'll use the word disclose. We want to disclose the information we've been using and the information we've used to make some decisions. And we want to talk about what's happened in the last several years since the last time we've come out to the public, which was back in 2013. So we're going to tell you where we are now. We have wonderful non-federal sponsors, Levee District. I know Angela's here representing the Levee District, but a lot of work has been done since the last time we came out to the public. So it's made us change the way we're doing things. So in the agenda today, I want to talk to you about how this works. Like, what are the rules of engagement? How are you able to give comment? How are we able to make sure that the team hears what you have to say? We'll talk about the schedule. There's other meetings that are going around the area, and we'll tell you about that. We'll talk about the project, the different alternatives we looked at when making some of the decisions. We'll talk about environmental consequences. That's where Patrick's going to talk over about some of the modeling we did and what helped us form some of the decisions we made, along with how we think the project will affect the environment. We're going to look at a project timeline. This is a huge project, 98 miles of levee system, but we do have a schedule as to how we're going to get all this done. So we'll talk that through and give you more opportunities to connect. I hope that by reaching out, looking at the QR code, going online, getting on the email list, that there'll be more of this dialogue. Because again, we want to partner with the public and want to get all the comments in. So rules of engagement. in order to be considered and to make, I guess, the margins clear, we want to make sure we concisely know what your comments are. So we want to make sure that you have that opportunity. So there's ways of doing it, and we'll actually go through that at the end, and there's a poster about it. But we want to wait till the end of this presentation. You can go to the court reporter, you can write it in, you can type it in, but we want to make sure we concisely know what your comment is so we can give a response to it and or take it into consideration. So I just ask that, even there's not many of y'all, and y'all don't seem like a rowdy crew, but wait to the end of the presentation before engage. But nothing wrong with asking clarifying questions. All right, so here is our public meeting schedule. We're going to meet here again today at 6 o'clock. We're also going to meet next week on the 15th. We'll be at the Civic Center in Houma. We're going to meet twice then too. We're going to meet at 2 and 6 like we did here. And the reason we do that is we want to make sure that everybody, no matter where they work or what their life is, they'd have ample opportunity to meet and engage with us. And then the week after that, we're going to meet in Thibodaux, over at Nichols and the Student Union Edition, and have 2 public meetings then. So this is also the map that you'll see over there. So Morganza to the Gulf, like I said, it's a 98-mile levee system. We started the study. So the federal government first got involved back in 1992 with the original study authority. And the way that federal projects work is it starts off like a local entity would come to the federal government and say, hey, we have this issue, we have this problem. We think it has a federal involvement. It could benefit the federal government to get involved. And so the local entity came back in 1992 and we got authorized to study this. So fast forward to when we were actually appropriated for construction. So we had to go through the study, figure out the alternatives. Then we actually had to go back and restudy it because after Hurricane Katrina, we looked a little closer at some of the laws. So there were some more stringent regulations that came out of that. So we realized what we had done in our original formulation, we had to increase that. So back in 2013, it was reauthorized, very similar to the levee alignment that you see today. But since 2013, there's also been a lot of changes. A good part about having a wonderful non-federal sponsor in the levee district, y'all levied your own taxes to be able to go ahead of the federal government before it got appropriated to build the over 80 miles of levee that you see today. So because of that, it made us shift some of the designs that we were looking at and made us make some different decisions. And we learned a lot more about the area. We've done more modeling. We've seen more about how the lands have subsided. We've seen a little more about sea level rise. So it's led us to come to some different recommendations. So going back to the original, what we say a problem, you could say it's a problem or it's the intent of the project. So the intent of the project is to combat storm surge due to wetland loss, sea level change, and subsidence. So if you notice within the parish, you've got the interior drainage, and that's a function of the parish and the levee district. And they will continue that function. But the purpose of the Morganza to the Gulf is strictly to make sure we combat that storm surge. So it's any of the tropical events that are coming from the Gulf. So that is the majority of our design criteria. So although that is why we build that, we need to take into account the interior drainage and make sure that the parish has the ability to maintain those similar levels of the flood risk reduction on the inside. All right. And as we see, there's about 200,000 people in the area, and we are combating the 1% annual exceedance probability storm, which is actually a theoretical storm, but you've also heard of it known as the 100-year storm. So it's supposedly the storm that we would see every 100 years on a probability standpoint. I told you a little bit about the background, started study phase in 1992, fast forward to 2013, got our latest authorization, and then we got our first appropriation. So every federal project has to have an authorization, which means Congress says, hey, this is a good idea, you need to proceed forward with this project. And then you also have to be appropriated or funded the money to do that. So we got our appropriation in 2021, and so that kicked off the designs that we have today, and right now we have 24 different contracts under design as we speak from the federal side, and numerous by the levy district that are going on now. So what we've done recently, so since 2013, we've looked a little harder at the design, and we wanted to take into consideration the levees that have been built thus far. And once you have levees built, you get strength gains in the soil, in the levees, so we are able to reduce some of the quantity of fill material that we need. So we're able to sharpen our pencils to get to a more cost-effective project that we're able to deliver today. All right, so again, about what the locals and the state have invested in so far. And I think what's really helped get this project funded is the commitment that the local levy districts have had to this. Over $1.1 billion have been spent thus far. In fact, south of here, one of the major projects they have going on now is the HNC Lock Complex, which was just under $400 million, but which is a major portion of this project, and it really helps advance this project and moving it forward. And they're very active in the design, so not only us reaching out to the public to get that input, you know, they're boots on the ground, they're here, they're listening to y'all, and they can give feedback to the federal government. So I know that in a lot of the presentations they give, and when they say that, from the time that I was between 2005 and 2019, they've seen almost a 99% reduction in flooding so far from storm surges. So it's working, and we got lucky with Francine. It could have been a lot worse, but we want to be ready if something, a more direct hit comes or a bigger storm, we want to be ready for that. So a lot of, we're getting there, and we're about halfway there, but I want to make sure that we're moving forward and to bring that risk reduction to its full level. So these are the different times we've gotten funding and the different features that have been funded in the years that we've gotten funding. So as you can see, we have several different features under design. So not only are we looking at levee lifts and levee reaches, we're also looking at some of the major structures. Two most notable are the floodgates at the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway. So those are going to be major sector gates, 225 feet wide. We're doing extensive studies along that. We're engaging with the navigation industry. We're engaging, you know, with U.S. Coast Guard to make sure that we can maintain safe passage for navigation through that area. So when you put it in a list, these are all the features that we have and are under design, and we are looking about the 2027, 2030 is when majority of these designs will be complete, and we will start construction along that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Patrick Smith, and he's going to go through more of the environmental consequences and the rest of the items as we look through the National Environmental Protection Act. So thank y'all.
Thanks, Lacey. Patrick Smith. I work for the Corps of New Orleans. I'm a supervisory biologist, and I'm going to go into some of the details that are in the draft supplemental environmental impact statement. Appreciate the project overview. And I wanted to open up with the table of contents just to give you an idea of all the different things that we looked at and the overall organization of our documents. The reason why is I like to look at this to try to figure out what's important to me and what I want to know, and then you can dive into it, because 12 sections, 16 appendices is a lot, but we really worked hard to develop new information to be able to understand what our project would be and what the impacts would be. This is available, all of this information is available online. The QR code there, our project website. We have a couple of copies of the main body of the report available if anybody's interested in that as well. And as Lacey touched on, we looked at 2 different alternatives for this particular EIS and this project. One of them is the no action alternative. So the National Environmental Policy Act requires that we look at the no action alternative. And it really works as like a baseline of what the existing condition is and would be in the future for which us to compare our proposed action. What that basically means is there's stuff on the landscape, there's levee systems on the landscape, there's wetlands on the landscape. We're considering building something else. And to better understand how what we're proposing to build would affect the human environment, we assess the no action alternative. And essentially this is no federal action would be implemented. It does include the levees and the structures that existed as of 2021 that were built by our non-federal sponsors. The levee heights range from about 5 to 15 feet. I have a more detailed slide on that in a bit, and there's a poster that goes over that as well. And essentially what we have on the landscape now does provide risk reduction, but it is not at the 1% or the 100-year level of risk reduction, which is what we're proposing to do. The proposed action is a comprehensive levee system. 86 miles of levees are included in this particular document. Note that we do not cover Reach A and Reach F in this document, and that would get us to the 98-mile levee system. And the reason why Reach A and Reach F are not in this document is because they were considered in earlier NEPA documents to allow us to construct those critical features quicker. But the rest of the system, exclusive of those 2 reaches, is considered here, and it includes, raising levee heights and structures to 11 to 26 feet, 24 environmental control structures, 15 navigable floodgates, 9 flood walls, and 8 roadway floodgates. It is an update of the 2013 alignment, and the primary things that we considered with this update are new and improved engineering criteria, as well as existing conditions have changed with the levees that are out there. And that allowed us to reduce and minimize our impacts to significant habitat and the human environment as well. Because there was a previously authorized project and there are a lot of existing features on the landscape, we did not assess any other alternatives other than the no action and the proposed action. And the proposed action and what we're all thinking about here is this levee system to provide risk reduction, but I've broken it apart into 3 different classes of features to include the levee system, which I have explained, and you can see on the map to the right, as well as on one of the poster boards in the back of the room. But an important part of our project is to be able to get borrow, right, the clay material to be able to build the levee systems. And so we identified that there would be about 55 million cubic yards of clay borrow material to be able to construct the levees to a 2035 design height, and about 28 million more cubic yards to go from 2035 to 2085. We identified 27% potential borrow sites throughout the project area, and you can see those in orange on the map to your right. And there are access roads where vehicles and trucks would transport the material from those borrow sites to the specific reaches that they would be used to build, right? We also could barge in some of the borrow material. There's a significant number of waterways throughout this project area, and it may be more cost effective to barge it in some scenarios. To be able to pick these borrow sites, propose these borrow sites, we used the best available data, which included remotely sensed imagery, HTRW databases, cultural resource databases, but recognize that there could be some significant habitat or cultural resource site within our borrow areas, and so we will do field investigations prior to constructing on any of these borrow sites, and would reduce their size and scope to either eliminate that or re-engage the public if there's a new impact to a resource that we have not identified. And then the third component of the overall project is mitigation. So for every impact to significant habitat, which in this case is primarily wetlands, we have to compensate for those losses and functions and values. And we have a proposed mitigation plan here that would compensate for all of those losses. There are 6 different habitat types that we would impact, and that is bottomland hardwoods, swamp, fresh marsh, intermediate marsh, brackish marsh, and saline marsh. And the table on the left breaks it down by the different habitat types and then the number of acres that the proposed mitigation site would be. So this is not the acres of impacts, but this is the acres of the individual mitigation sites. And the table represents our tentatively selected plan. So this is what we are proposing to do, whereas our map also includes features from the final array. So the map has more features than the table does, but all of the features that are shown in the table are on the map. For instance, Napoleonville is the TSP, or the selected plan, or the proposed mitigation plan to compensate for losses to bottomland hardwoods and swamp. And you can see that in green and pink, the corresponding colors on the map there. But you also will see Supreme, right? So Supreme was a site that was in the final array, but was not as cost effective as Napoleonville. And so that's kind of how you should read these 2 pieces of information, and the main document as well as the mitigation appendix discusses all of the sites in the final array and in more detail the selected plan, the tentatively selected plan. And I really like this figure here because it helps me understand the existing condition and what we're proposing to do on a reach by reach basis. And so the figure at the bottom has 3 line graphs on it, and they really represent 3 points in time, right? The blue line graph is the average levee height by reach at 2021. The yellow line graph is the same levee reach, but what we are proposing to build at the 2035 1% or 100-year level. And the red line is the 1% or 100-year level at the year 2085, what we are proposing to build. And so, like Lacey was saying, there is a really complex, functional levee system out there. And what we're proposing to do is to bring it to that standard. And this, as she was saying also, isn't going to happen in one contract and overnight. We have a lot of designs that we're working on, and the majority of the construction would occur in calendar year 2026, 2027, on out until 2030 or 2032. So the remainder of what I'm going to present on are what we assessed as project impacts. And so this is what we think the impacts of us implementing the 2085 100-year storm event levee system, borrow, and mitigation that I went over here briefly. And there are 15 different impact types that I'm going to discuss. I'm going to spend the majority of my time here in slides on storm surge, and project increased water levels, but will address and summarize what our impacts would be to these other 14 resources as well. And so how do we assess for potential changes to water levels? The purpose of this project is provide risk reduction to a 100-year level storm. And so we use the coastal storm modeling system, which integrates ADCIRC and SWAN models to produce storm surge heights and waves. And the first suites of models we ran were for the future without project condition at year 2035 and 2085. And what that basically means is, what is the water level if we get a 100-year storm and we do not build our project? That's what the map on the right shows, what the expected water levels would be. And all of these are cool colors, right, in the blues, and essentially the darker the blue, the higher the projected water level would be. We looked at and assessed in our document the 100-year storm event, 20-year storm event, and 2-year storm event for the future without project, the future with project conditions. We also created another series of maps, right? This one on our left was created from the data on the one on the right. The one on the right has the future without project condition water levels, and the one on the left is a difference map. So we ran the same models, the same probabilistic storm events if we were to build our project, and then subtracted the water level if we build it from the water level if we didn't, right? And that's what produces this difference map. And what you can see here basically is that on what would be the interior of our system, either no change in water level as shown in gray, or a decrease in water level, which is kind of the orange salmon color. And then on the exterior of the system, you see more of those cool colors. And what those cool colors indicate is not what the water level would be, but what the water level difference would be, right? If a hurricane comes, it's going to push a lot of water into the Terrebonne Basin. And this shows the difference if you were to build the project that we proposed versus if we were not to. And in general, what we found was water levels on the outside of the system would be raised for a period of about 12 to 48 hours with a 100-year storm, and then would decrease following the event. It shows a range of plus 1.25 to plus 4 feet next to the levee of more water. That's not total water, but more water with the proposed action, right? And to kind of dive down into that a little bit more, we selected, I think 8 locations. Yeah, 8 locations where we produced bar charts that showed the future with project, right? If we were going to build it, the future without project, if we left all the things out on the landscape and didn't build it, and then the difference. And I'm going to highlight 3 of those for y'all here and explain what the model results told us. But in the report, we have it for each of these 8 locations. And so here you see the star on the map, and it shows Gibson. That is the distinct point in which we looked at what the water level would be with the current system and what the water level would be if we were to build our system and what the difference is. And the bar chart on the right, the orange shows the without project, and it is 8.8 feet. If we were to build our project, our models suggest that it would be about 9 feet. And then in green, which is really small for this location, it's 0.2 feet. And so our anticipated water levels with project would be plus 9 feet. And the difference would be 0.2 of a foot higher than if we were not to build our project, for instance. The next one is that we chose to present is Dulac. And so it's on the exterior of the system, not terribly far from where we are right now. in the middle of the system. And so again, the star shows the precise location where we pulled these data from the different model runs. And this is the 2085 1% scenarios that I'm showing you right now. And then the same coloring scheme where the green bar shows the difference, blue shows if we were to build our project, and orange shows if we were not. And what we found in DULAC was the models predicted about 13.9 feet of water without the project and 14.7 with the project, a difference of about 0.8 of a foot. And the last one I'm going to show for you today is Ile de Jean Charles, which is again shown with a gold star, the location where we pulled these data. The same colors, where orange is without building the proposed action, blue is building the proposed action, and green is the difference for a 2085 100-year storm. For Ile de Jean Charles, our models predicted plus 13.8 feet without building our levee system, and plus 15.2 if we were to build it, with a difference of plus 1.3 feet. And in the report that again is either available in print or online, we'll go over the other 5 areas that I didn't discuss here in a similar manner. We also took the area that we showed in the previous maps and used a structure inventory to be able to assess how many structures would have an increase in water with implementation of our proposed action. And so again, this isn't necessarily a structure that we would place water on that doesn't already have water. It's much more likely that these structure locations would be getting water in the without project condition, and they would be getting more water in the proposed action. Our 2 thresholds, one was 1 millimeter, right? So just any change at all, 1 millimeter is very small. And we found that about 752 structures would receive more water at threshold of 0. Again, we did not consider the elevation of these structures or what the absolute water level was. So we did not look at what the water level would be. Would it be 10 feet or 2 feet or 5 feet? It just was there any change at all between the 2 scenarios that we modeled? And was there a structure there in our inventory? And so the next threshold we looked at was a 1/2 foot, 6 inches. You know, how many structures would be in a location where our models predict that there would be 6 inches or more difference in water? And we found that about 488 structures would have that for a 100-year storm in 2085. And that these impacts would be for between 12 and 48 hours. So these impacts of an increased water level would occur right as the storm passes and would dissipate, our model suggests, dissipate shortly after it moves through. And we looked at other scenarios, and we found that these differences would be smaller for less substantial, more frequent storms. And so what that basically means is for a 100-year storm, there would be a larger difference than there would be for a 50-year storm, than there would be for a 25-year storm, than there would be for a 2-year storm. And so the Fifth Amendment states that private property cannot be taken for public use without just compensation. And so we would mitigate for any induced flooding impacts that we determine would be necessary prior to construction. And so we have not completed that analysis. We have the data that I presented to you just now about what we think the water is going to do. And there's a team of folks at the Corps who are using those and other data to determine whether or not there would be an impact from water level that would require mitigation. And again, all this is in the report. If you have any, you want to read about it more, if you have any questions, at the end, I'm happy to talk about it more. But essentially, we've identified seven different mitigation options were that to be necessary. And that includes, creating a structural feature like a levee, adding additional culverts, outlets, or other environmental control structures, drainage canals, identifying ponding areas, pump stations, as well as non-engineering features such as acquisition of easements or some real estate interest in property based upon the outcome of this. We would do more work and have more NEPA documentation and engage the public again if we were to consider any of the engineering features. So the first 5 potential mitigation features that I mentioned, if we were to consider implementing any of those, more work would need to be done by my team, and we would engage the public again. Okay, so moving on from water level to the other 14 resources that I'm going to present to you today. And the next one is impacts of significant habitat. It's wetlands for this particular project. And we found that the direct impacts to be about 4,574 acres. And so what is a direct impact? It's where we would build a levee, right? And so if we would build a levee and it exists today as a wetland, then that would be a direct impact. And these would be to the same habitat types that I just discussed for mitigation: bottomland hardwood, swamp, fresh intermediate marsh, saline marsh. Also, this project would alter the hydrology. We talked about that some, and we did different models than what I discussed for changes in water levels due to storms, to be able to assess to see if any like day-to-day conditions or tidal conditions or drainage conditions would have impacts, a significant impact to significant habitat. And this analysis is incomplete at this point. We have not completed our ecological modeling for this, but we identified about 1,059 acres of significant habitat, and it's shown in that bottom right map there. Essentially, when you look at it at a big scale, there's a few isolated pockets where there would be, our modeling suggests there would be some change in hydrology that would affect a significant habitat. We don't have, like I said, we don't have ecological modeling to be able to understand what the function and value difference would be, but that will be a part of the final SEIS, which will be available to the public as well. And that all of these habitat impacts will be fully compensated for through our habitat mitigation plan that I discussed earlier. The next couple of slides, we have each slide, it breaks 3 different resources up, and we're going to talk about them a little bit more concisely. Endangered Species Act. So we have determined that the project is not likely to adversely affect species that could occur in the area. We have concurrence with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on that. We are still coordinating with National Marine Fisheries Service for their species, but that will be completed prior to finalization and decision making. Essential fish habitat, and it would adversely impact estuarine marsh in the study area, similar to what we talked about in the previous slide. And we have an agreement with the National Marine Fisheries Service under this particular resource type, to where they are reviewing our proposed mitigation plan and the project under EFH. Wildlife habitat would be converted to uplands and project features, so there would be loss to wildlife habitat associated with it. The majority of animals that can move, like birds and larger mammals, reptiles and amphibians, would disperse prior to construction, but sessile, non-mobile species would likely perish with construction of the project. Coastal resources. We are coordinating with the Louisiana Department of Conservation and Energy for coastal zone consistency determination. and that this would be complete prior to finalizing the SEIS. Water quality. We have two different parts of the Clean Water Act that are that would either be a part of the final SEIS or would be completed prior to decision making. And that includes a Section 404B1 analysis, as well as a Section 401 water quality certificate. And each individual contractor, when we have more details about how we would build things or how we would excavate borrow material, would be required to get a stormwater pollution prevention plan if necessary. For hazardous, toxic, and radioactive waste, surveys and a desktop analysis indicate that there are no HTRW concerns in the footprint, but we would complete a site assessment prior to construction for individual contracts. And if we discover any HTRW concerns, they would be relocated or avoided. Recreation and public lands reaches J1, J2, J3, K, and L would be on Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries Point-of-Shin WMA and would bisect it. We're coordinating with LDWF staff on the impacts of this project and our mitigation plan, as well as the design of the proposed structures, right? The water or the environmental control structures that would be on their property. Farmland, it would remove the construction of the levee system would remove about 1,100 acres of prime farmland. And if we were to implement the entire borrow plan, it would remove around 2,600 acres of farmland. On the other side, it would also provide benefits to farmland that would be on the interior because it would reduce flooding to them. Traffic and navigation. The project would have minor temporary increases in navigation during construction from water-based or waterborne vehicles. We talked a little bit about how we could use barges to move material from a borrow pit to our levee alignment, and that's primarily where that would occur. There would be truck traffic that would pass through residential areas during construction, and that would be a temporary impact, but any impacts that would occur to any infrastructure would be repaired to pre-existing conditions after construction is completed. Air and noise, similar to truck traffic, there would be some temporary adverse impacts on air and noise during construction, but we do not anticipate any long-term impacts for this. We would implement best management practices to minimize dust and air emissions, things like washdown racks, covering our trucks, stuff like that. And pile driving would be limited to daylight hours. Socioeconomic impacts, similar to air and noise and traffic, there would be some adverse impacts during construction to communities along the roadways that we would use to transport borrow material and crews and stuff like that. But over the long term, there would be reduced flooding levels for many businesses and people on the interior of our system. For cultural resources, we are in the process of finalizing a programmatic agreement, and the project could impact tribal lands and historic properties. The effects have not been fully determined, but we are working towards an agreement with interested parties under the National Historic Preservation Act. And we would execute this agreement in order to comply with that law. We wanted to highlight a slide on tribal resources. There are 5 state designated tribal statistical areas within the project watershed: Bayou Lafourche, Grand Caillou, Dulac, Ile de Jean Charles, Point-of-Shin, and the United Home of Nations. We've engaged these tribal communities, and they have expressed concerns about truck traffic that would pass through these statistical areas. And we did investigate, and we did discuss earlier in this presentation the increased water levels for the Ile-de-Jean-Charles community. They would be impacted by water level increases during storms of up to about 1.3 feet for the 100-year 2085 scenario. And like I said earlier, if we, during our analysis, if we determine that there is an induced flooding here that would require mitigation, it would be implemented prior to construction. And then the last thing I wanted to discuss with you all today is that the draft SEIS public review period ends January 23rd. Please provide us with any comments. The entire purpose of this is to come here and talk with you all about what you think that y'all see on the landscape or any concerns that you have with our project. We want to hear them. And there will be another public review period with the final SEIS. We are anticipating that to be into summer, early fall this year. And thank you.
All right. Thanks, Lacey and Patrick, for the information. This concludes the briefing part. One thing I forgot to mention, we have these comment cards, they're postage paid. If you know someone that wanted to come but couldn't and is interested in the project, we ask you take some with you and just hand them out. And they can fill out the comments here, they can go online. And there's all the ways, again, that you can contact us. So that's going to conclude the presentation here, and we're going to go back into open house and answer any questions you might have. Thank you.